I would have put my RCDS tie on, but I haven't got one. And I am also colourblind, which explains this thing. And it is interesting that I was introduced early on as a bookend, which I've been called ruder things as well. So General, professors, ladies and gentlemen, I'm the UK Mil Rep to NATO and the European Union. I represent CDS on the Military Committee, which, contrary to what you may have heard earlier on, does retain a degree of utility, even if we were sacked from fourth generation some 25 years ago. We generate military advice from the two strategic commands and pass it on to the North Atlantic Council for decision, where our Ambassador David Quarry represents the UK. Before I get into the detail, I'd like to thank General Andrew and Luke and the team both for inviting me today and for the superb organisation of this event. An interesting aside on CHACR. I really enjoyed hearing General Andrew being described as a chancer earlier on, but I think in the UK delegation we can beat it. I was surprised to be asked if I would like to speak at a CHACR event a couple of weeks ago. One. Right up. No, blimey. So 2 questions. What are we celebrating and where does the alliance go from here? NATO means something different to each person and each time you ask the question. At the start of my career in Northern Ireland in 1988, NATO felt distant from a young platoon commander. In 1988, I worried more about the battalions of Pyro's South Armagh Brigade than General Belikov's group of Soviet forces in Germany. And NI was definitely more edgy than Paderborn for a young officer. But in summer of 1989, I moved to West Berlin with the Royal Welsh Fusiliers and had the good fortune of being the orderly officer when the red phone rang in the guard room, signalling the breach of the wall on the 9th of November 1989. By then, the alliance was 40 years old, 16 allies and only half of Germany. We'd reached half-time towards NATO 75. NATO had been central to maintaining peace and security in the Euro-Atlantic area, and we entered a period which saw the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, and where Eastern European nations and former Soviet republics exercised their sovereign right to independence and to apply to accede to NATO in line with Article 10 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which states that membership is open to any European state in a position to further the principles of the treaty and to contribute to the security of the North Atlantic area. This principle is regularly restated, most recently in the 2023 Vilnius Summit communique. Russia was, of course, still there, but relationships were stable, as we heard earlier on, with Russia having joined the Partnership for Peace programme in 1997 and the NATO-Russia Council being established in 2002. It's perhaps salutary to remember that geography and proximity mean that Russia will always be there, and there will always be a relationship between it and NATO. NATO operations in the Western Balkans punctuated some of this time. Allies joined coalition-led operations in Iraq, and then NATO's Afghan Resolute Support Mission consumed focus and resource. The alliance was primarily occupied with a posture set to address the terror group's threat. That said, I vividly remember a Ukrainian colleague in tears as he left Kabul in late 2013. As he thought that he knew what was coming even then. And so in 2014, the world changed again and has continued to do so. In 2024, NATO's posture looks more to me like it did in 1989, albeit with 32 allies facing Russia, 14 having rebadged from the Warsaw Pact, and with a new set of plans to deter and defend, as General Tim described earlier. Not back to the future, but certainly drawing forward lessons from that time to inform our current posture. And worth reflecting Article 13 of the North Atlantic Treaty. Since 1969, allies have been able to leave the alliance on application. Quite the reverse has been the case. On arrival in Brussels late last year, I saw that 14 mil reps had started their careers in the academies of the USSR. Whilst some perhaps harbour fond memories of a miserable economic reality, guaranteed job, decent healthcare, perhaps a trabant for good behaviour in East Germany, the prevailing narrative was one of subordination, subjugation, occupation, followed by liberation and the freedom to exercise sovereign choice. These Eastern allies speak to us of NATO as a guarantor of freedom, with state institutions designed to suppress and eliminate dissent now confined to museums in Riga, Tallinn and elsewhere. Quite different from our experience. Their recent history and proximity to Russia really matter. They and their parents remember what failure to deter and defend every inch would mean. Their language is unequivocal, their intent quite visceral. So we celebrate 75 years of security and a lesser period for some of the Eastern allies, and accept a solemn duty to protect 1 billion citizens. But celebration is tempered, in my view, given Russia's second invasion of Ukraine and the reality that geostrategic competition continues to evolve. The UK and many allies and partners recognise that we cannot insulate ourselves from Ukraine. When Putin's army invaded again in 2022, he said he wanted less NATO. What he got, of course, was more, with Finland and Sweden making NATO stronger and more secure. The UK drove the ambition for a 2% spending target in 2014 at the Wales summit and has consistently met the target. Other speakers have mentioned the Prime Minister's announcement earlier on this week. You heard the Secretary General welcome that alongside the Prime Minister, and you heard the Secretary of State for Defence make a series of supporting points yesterday in the context of 2.5%. And even President Duda of Poland raised the challenge, I think this morning, to 3%. So the conversation is live. Where do we go from here? A significant transformation of the collective defence model continues at pace. My personal view is that we should be careful about reflecting on what we used to do as not very good, and everything we started 5 minutes ago or this year as brilliant because it's our work. The reality is that we're proceeding along a continuum as NATO and allies continue to develop. We've established a new force model and new plans. Now the challenge is mitigating execution risk and refining the efficacy of those plans through exercising and testing them, and building resilience within and across the force as new capabilities come online. And this year has seen significant activity, not least with Steadfast Defender, with 90,000 troops across Europe, of which about 20,000 were British from across the joint force. The messaging is clear. NATO is ready to execute CHACR's new plans. That said, of course, there will always be more to do. And I've yet to meet a military professional who sits confident in the knowledge that they have all they need to address every single contingency. So we have a solemn responsibility to ensure that NATO retains effectiveness beyond its 75th birthday. And in my view, that will require a deliberately inquisitive mindset, a focus on enhancing support for Ukraine both now and in the future, and a determined effort to transform the alliance such that it is tooled for the future challenge which none of us are able to predict. I see that very same level of commitment across all 32 allies in Brussels. Solid alignment, a determined commitment to enhance allied capability, such that we remain set to deter and defend. Of course, there are lively conversations about the nature of context, the national perceptions of risk, all informed by constant news cycles and the rest of it. And there is also a degree of conversations filling all available time. But when the moment to decide arrives, I see solid alignment and determination to act. NATO will, of course, continue to evolve. It will also continue to respond to emergent instability. The conversation about NATO's locus in the region or more broadly will continue. And the focus on the second of the main threats that NATO looks at, terror groups, inevitably draws our focus beyond the Euro-Atlantic landmass. It is no surprise that the appetite for partnerships in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and the Indo-Pacific continues to grow. The challenge for us in the alliance is one of capacity to efficiently respond to those requests, and our ability to supply the security and defence requested by those partners, and to leverage NATO's comparative advantage in security and defence alongside other institutions such as the UN and the EU. To finish, a reflection on the conversation we've been having about thought leadership. I would also add to that humility. I don't much like the term. I don't think it's a great descriptor. And it also plays to that caricature of Brits as arrogant. But it is a thing. Many allies look to the UK, and we have as much right as anyone to lead the way. And we must continue to have the courage to lead, not least because of the set of specific capabilities that we deliver into the alliance, and also the insight that we gain through access to intelligence, which people have mentioned earlier on. But I draw a parallel to another phrase beloved of staff colleges, such as this one, the notion of politically aware military advice. Now, I'm probably not alone in this room in not wanting platoon commanders factoring that into how they take a hill. But I would expect it at the op and the strat level. The same applies to thought leadership. Perhaps less conversation about the term and more carefully calibrated insertion of ideas to continue to drive the development of the alliance. Thank you.